So, climate entrepreneurship. First of all, incredible, all the things you've done over the last couple of years. Silicon Valley, India, Switzerland. Where's home, by the way, for you?
It's Switzerland now.
Okay.
But I was born in India, worked most of my adult life in Silicon Valley, then went back to India to make a social impact.
Yeah.
Ended up creating one of the largest solar companies in the world, and then decided to find a place which would be great to raise a family,
Yeah.
clean air,
Yeah.
lots of outdoors,
Uh-huh.
and an opportunity to contribute in ESG sector. So I turned up in Switzerland.
So you're here. You should be like an unofficial ambassador for Switzerland. You basically got all the pros there. Amazing. So you've seen a lot of the world. You've experienced a lot of the world. And you've, in many ways, lived multiple lives. And now you are teaching climate entrepreneurship at EPFL. So I have a bunch of questions regarding climate entrepreneurship and climate startups. And also, as someone who has founded a company and IPO'd and everything else, I have questions also about startups. Any of you that have questions, as always, please engage, because I do a whole lot of talking, and this isn't even my event. So please, would love to hear your questions. So do get involved as much as possible. Because we have a varied audience in the room, can you differentiate, before we jump into this, between startup and scale-up?
Yeah. So, there is this notion of valley of death that most young entrepreneurs fear. That you can have a great idea, you can start the business, you can probably get your family to back you up, perhaps raise money from some competitions, find a few paying customers, but then you could still die. And that's the valley of death. And scalability or sustainability of a venture is the real test for you to climb that valley of death into a business that hopefully will outlive your own life. And hence, it's extremely important to think about how do you take an idea and build a scalable or a sustainable business, which is very different from what a startup is all about.
So the possibility of failure and death is higher at the startup stage than at the scale-up stage?
It's the statistics, if I remember correctly, almost I'd say 11 out of 12 companies die in that valley of death. So it's extremely low probability for companies to jump over and become a sustainable enterprise.
So talk to us about climate startups. I have never been involved in a climate startup. What's different? What makes it peculiar or unique?
Startups are hard work, and if any one of you in the room is working on one, you would know, how hard you have to work. You have to focus on your product, you have to focus on capital, you have to focus on people. Those are challenges that any company would face. Now, all of a sudden, if the startup becomes a climate startup, you have to have the complexity of regulation. Is another challenge now you have to surmount. If you're building a biotech company, people come to Lausanne to build a biotech company. If you want to build a software company, people go to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to build a climate company, where do you go?
I don't know.
There is no hub for a climate company. So that's another challenge. You have to build your own ecosystem. You have to be really good at attracting talent, because generally talent is sucked by the big successful enterprises, right? Google, Facebook, Microsoft. A lot of people want to go there. Either they want to build their own startup or they want to go there. But they don't want to come work for a startup. So attracting talent, dealing with regulation, and building an ecosystem is quite unique for scaling a climate enterprise.
So what I'm hearing is climate startups need everything that every other startup needs: talent, funding, the right infrastructure and environment, except they don't have any of it. Right. So far. Is that true? Is that there's really no hub, no ecosystem, no favorable nation or space?
So favorable nation, when you think about, if you're manufacturing equipment, everybody goes to China.
Yeah.
Right? So there is sort of some setup available for a manufacturing company. But when you think about, some of the ideas you heard earlier, there isn't a hub for that.
Yeah.
For managing, forestation, for building a renewable energy generation company. There is no one place to go do that. Many countries talk about it, like the Middle East talks about it, India talks about it.
Right.
But it's not like you land into this place and all of a sudden you have access to talent, you have access to policy, you have access to capital, you have the entire ecosystem like it has been built for companies in Silicon Valley for tech, and companies for biotech here.
Right. I need to press and ask more about that because that boggles my mind, given that we're at a conference where everyone's like, this is super important, we have to do this, and yet you're telling me that there isn't the space for it. And as someone who's an ecosystem player that does think at the macro level about the ingredients that are necessary to create the right environment for growth, why hasn't that happened? What is the big scary thing? Is it regulation that seems to be impossible to get over? Is it that the sales cycle or even the process on return on investment is so long that people don't want to in? Like, what has been that red flag? What scares people from building that environment?
I think, like, I'd say if you go back 20 years, there was a lot of cynicism around climate change.
Yeah.
I mean, there are leaders of the free world saying climate change is a hoax.
Right.
You know, so we've come a long way from that, where it's no longer a hoax, it's a real problem that we have to solve. So some of this is just a function of evolution, that we are evolving. Everybody now is on the same page. I don't think you would have much debate around what needs to happen to manage climate. The key is now these little seeds are being sown in many countries. I have not seen a clear emergence of a hub other than the manufacturing in China, which I think will change over time. So it's just a matter of evolution where these things will happen. But all the things you said, whether there isn't a policy, there isn't a regulation, most countries did not have a policy or regulation to procure renewable energy. Many countries even today don't have policies to buy electric vehicles. So that's the reality. But they all saying, yes, we want to do it. So you start moving towards that in lock, stock, and barrel, and hopefully we'll have this all set up in the next few years.
I want to come back to what you mentioned about scale up. I have had the fortune of building quite a few startups, and very few went into scale up mode. That's clearly what I did wrong because I've never IPO'd, which you have. So how do you know you're on that trajectory? What are the things, the ingredients, what should founders be thinking about when making that shift from startup to scale up?
Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, everything has to be backed by a very strong vision, right? Yeah. So you have a great idea, a lot of people can come up with an idea, but do you really have the vision, the long-term view to build an enterprise that is going to be, outliving you yourself, and the organization that you're building becomes so important and big. So you have to have that vision. Now, once you had that vision, then you have to figure out a plan to execute it. And it's a lot of hard work. I mean, there's a rule that I talk about, 10,000 hours, which many others have talked about as well, is you don't have to be in the right time and the right place to build a business. A lot of people think, this guy got lucky. He was there in India when the policy was right, and he built, and the prices of solar were coming down, and hence he built a company that went public. It's not really true. I mean, you have to really line up people. You need the talent. You have to hire people who complement you. You have to build process in an organization, because 5 people in a room can do wonders, can do magic, but try doing the same thing repeatable with 500 people outside the room in 5 different countries, right, or 3 different cities. Right. It falls apart. So you have to have a very strong process, very strong product, talent, and partnerships. You can't do everything yourself. You have to decide what is core to you, what is non-core to you. So you can then scale up your core functions and have somebody else scale up the non-core functions. And then you have to wait for the right moment when all the things align. You have the capital, you have the process, you have the people, you have the opportunity, and boom, like you become one of the largest players in the market. So it's literally, the anecdote that I like to give is, when I started the solar power company, the largest player was a company called Wadhwa, here in Europe, with 76 megawatts of operating capacity. And I got the first 1 megawatt. So I had to think about going 76x times to build that business to be someone real. And I said, hey, I'll build a 100 megawatt company out of India, and I'll be one of the largest players. I started the business in 2009. It took me 5 years to get to 100 megawatts, 5 years. But I got to that 100 megawatt in one shot. In that 5th year, we won one of the largest auctions that any country had ever done at the time, because we had been working for 5 years really hard. So all the things I'm saying, people, product, partnerships, they all have to be aligned for you to be able to cross the chasm or cross the valley of death to become a sustainable business.
All right. So I know you said it's not just about being right place, right time, but it is an element of it as long as you put in the groundwork of the people, the process, and all of that, the product, market fit, all of those things. And then when the opportunity strikes, you're ready for it and ready for the get-go. How long does the process of a scale-up take?
The example I shared with you is took us 5 years, and then interestingly enough, when I talk about the 10,000-hour rule, if you work 8 hours a day, I mean, by the way, founders work like 20 hours a day, but even if you were to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it comes out to be about 5 years.
Okay.
Even the 10,000-hour rule. So that's, in my mind, is you can scale up something much faster, much quicker, but typically it takes 4 to 5 good years to build an organization that will be there to stay forever.
I have exhausted my questions, but we have lots of great questions that have come in. So I'm going to prioritize these. So here we go. Regarding capital/debt financing, is it easier or more difficult for climate startups than other startups?
Raising capital is the same amount of effort, whether you're doing a climate startup or a non-climate startup. Capital chases returns. You can get some grants, but you can't build a large scale up based on grants and on concessional capital. You can't really build a business around that. And when you are out of that realm and building a business which is based on financial returns for investors, the investors have the option of putting money in a climate company or a non-climate company, and they expect at least the same returns. So if you're giving the same returns and it's a climate opportunity, you're likely to attract more investors. But if you say my returns are lower than what these other businesses can offer, you'll find it very hard to attract that money. Now, you did talk about equity and debt. You have to be very thoughtful about the capital structure of your company. And as a climate startup, hopefully you have a business model that gives you, revenue in long-term contracts. And if you're able to monetize those long-term contracts through debt finance, it's a non-dilutive way to grow the business. So that is something I would encourage every climate startup to think about, rather than raising a lot of expensive equity capital upfront. Unlike some of the infrastructure or software infrastructure, companies can raise equity capital and then they're just clipping coupons. But with climate, every asset you build, every asset you own needs new capital, and you can't keep diluting through lots of equity earlier in the years.
If a startup does not scale, has it failed?
It's really a function of the founder's mindset and the team. If a startup hasn't scaled, by definition, it means it's not going to be a large company. But can you have a small business in climate? Yes, you of course can have a small business in climate. So scale is really for growing a business to where you want it to take, but that doesn't mean every company has to go public or every company has to have $1 billion in valuation.
All right. Do we need one unicorn or a million, they said bees, or startups to save the climate?
I'm not a big fan of the word unicorn. These fads will come and go, but we do need a lot of companies in this space to meet our climate goals and climate targets. And I would even go a step further to say, forget the companies. Each one of us as individuals can make life choices. Whether do we drive a car, or do we take public transportation, or we ride a bicycle to work to help with emissions? Do we turn off the lights that we don't need? Do we turn off the tap? Can we take a shower in like 5 minutes? I mean, a lot of choices we all can make to have a better environment and solve the climate problem. And if we all start doing that, the companies will do that for sure.
There's a question that's a little bit more personal, but I hope you will take it.
Sure.
Which is, who was the Inderpreet in startup mode versus now? So what are some of your personal insights? Would you be willing to share your own growth through this?
Sure. I think this is something that you asked me earlier to share upon, and I talked about persistent and status quo. I think I'm the same person that I was as a child in terms of my core traits, and the same person through the journey of the startup, and the same person I'm sitting here, right? Of course, I have a little bit more experience, so I'm probably not gonna appear to be stupid in front of a lot of people. But when it comes to my core DNA, I'm very curious, And I push, is what people tell me. I push a lot, and I call it challenging the status quo. The first or the earliest memory that I have is perhaps in elementary school, in my mathematics exam, I had 2 optional questions, which I also attempted. And I got 100% marks in that exam. And one of the optional question was marked wrong. And I was upset that it is marked wrong because I believe it is right. And I told my father that he must go and talk to the principal about this. And he said, are you sure? Because you do have 100% score. What else do you want? I said, it's a question of principle. I do believe this is right. So we go to the principal's office. The math teacher is called. And he said, like, Inderpreet is really upset, and he wanted me to call this meeting. So, of course, the math teacher is probably thinking this guy is crazy. Huh? So he's here. He believes this answer is right. I explained the theory to him, and he said, but in the class, I taught you in a different way to answer the question, but you have done it in a different manner. I said, but is the answer right? He said, yes. Yeah. So I said, like, where in the exam did you say you must attempt the answer the way I taught you? So that was sort of the earliest example I have. Then when I decided, so I spent after my undergrad in engineering, I spent a decade in Silicon Valley writing software programs for Oracle Corporation. And then all of a sudden I had this drive to come back to India and do something socially conscious, and I created the renewable energy company. But before starting the company, I have a tremendous respect for my father. And I told him that this is what I want to do. He said, you want to come back to India and you want to start an infrastructure company. I have a couple of observations on your decision. And I know most of the decisions in your life you've taken without my approval, but I still should tell you that what is my view. I said, no, I value your view always. He said, first thing is, you've never worked in India. After your undergrad, you moved to Silicon Valley, and it's a frictionless environment in Silicon Valley. There's absolutely no friction. You can do what you want to do, be what you want to be, and you are coming back to India, and you're picking a regulated sector. Let me remind you, you've never worked in a regulated sector. And third, you're picking infrastructure, which is capital intensive, and you don't come from a rich family. So my question back to you is, how much time and money are you going to waste before going back to California? And I said, Dad, like, everything you're saying makes complete sense to me. It is very logical, it is very rational, but I am extremely passionate about the cause, and I believe I can build this business. And if I'm able to build this business, would you come work for me? He said, you'll never build this business, so I'll never have to work for you. He became the chief operating officer of Azure Power, and he retired a year after I retired from Azure Power. Now, it was, thank you for that. Now, it was interesting, right? I mean, I turned his sort of concern or critique back into an advantage. I completely agree with him. I have zero experience in regulation in India. He retired as the chairman of the largest insurance company in India, and insurance companies invest in nothing but AAA rated infrastructure projects. And if I could have him as my chief operating officer, I solved 2 birds with 1 stone. 1, I prove him wrong, and 2, I get the best possible regulatory expertise on my bench. So that's sort of, coming back to what kind of character I have and what kind of person I am as Inderpreet. Those are sort of the qualities that I grew up with. And then, of course, when I said I built this great company, it's listed, and I told my father again, look, I am planning on retiring. He said, what's your age? I said, you know what's my age. That's a trick question, right? So he said, you're too young to retire. The company's gone public. Now is the time for you to realize the salary, the pay, the comforts, get a new car, buy a new house. Like, now you're rolling in cash and you want to retire. I said, yes. He said, why? I said, I have 3 children, 4 actually, sorry, losing count at the time. 2 were older. I said, the younger ones, I worry about their health. The air quality in Delhi is not that great, so I have to leave Delhi. Now, if I have to leave Delhi, I have to move to a different place. I don't think it's fair to the organization for me to do this, so I must do that. Second, everything I wanted to accomplish in terms of regulation, in terms of policy, in terms of capital, everybody wants to build a public company. I've done it. So now this is in maintenance mode. Anybody can run it. So I want to go do something else. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I want to teach. he said, you know what, like, there's no point. There's nothing I can change here, right? So I moved to Switzerland. I started teaching in EPFL, and he visited for the first time a month ago, and he said, I understand why you made this choice.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Ladies and gentlemen, Inderpreet Wadhwa.